In honor of Halloween, I'm trying something new. In this video, me and a guest will be narrating scary stories with ambient rain in the background. They're intended to help you relax, be entertained, or fall asleep to. So if you enjoy this experiment, please like, comment, and subscribe with the bell. It really helps me out when you do. And now, I present Scary Stories on a Rainy Night. There was a window in the house my parents bought that summer in 2009. Well, okay, there were a lot of windows, but there was an unexpected window. A window that shouldn't have been there. It was in the basement. We didn't know what it was at first because it was boarded up with rotting wood that slowly fell away from the wall. It was a bit of a fixer-upper, that house. So Dad tore off the rest of the wood, and that's where we found the window. It was an oval shape with one piece of glass inside, and when you tried to peer through it, all you could see was a brick wall. It was very strange. Even Mom and Dad were perplexed, and that's back when they knew everything. Or at least I thought they did. So for them to have no answers was some kind of extraordinary to me at the time. My brother Adam, my sister Margot, and I were fascinated by the little window. We liked to sit in the unfinished basement and stare at it, making up stories about why it was there and what was really behind it. Sometimes they were fantasy stories about fairies and magic and faraway lands. Sometimes they were scary stories about ghosts and goblins. More than often, they were something in between. As the weeks wore on in the new house, Margot and I grew sort of bored of the little window. There were other things in the house to explore after all, but Adam, he was obsessed with it. He kept begging us to play with him in the basement so we could make up games with the window. He was tiresome about it, as little brothers often are. So while Margot and I explored the attic, and the big walk-in pantry, and the creek in the woods behind our house, Adam stayed in the basement. We thought it was a little weird, but our parents told us that it was nothing to worry about. One day, maybe about a month or so after we had moved into the house, I went down in the basement to call Adam up for supper. I found him with his eyes closed, counting aloud. "What are you doing?" I asked him. "I'm playing hide and seek." "What? With who?" "With the girl in the window." I looked at the window, but didn't see anything, just that brick wall behind it. "I don't see anyone," I said. He replied with, "That's because she's hiding, dummy." I'm it. Once he was done counting, he turned to go upstairs. "Hey, where are you going?" "It's supper time, isn't it?" "Well, yes, but you said you were playing a game." "This is the game," he said. "I'll have to come back and try and catch her in the window. If I just stand here and stare, she'll never come out. I have to surprise her." I told him he was being weird, and he just shrugged it off and went upstairs to eat. But I had to take one last hard look at that window. I still didn't see anything. I figured Adam was just messing with me. I caught Adam playing hide and seek with the window several times over the next few weeks. He told me that this was his favorite game to play, and he tried to get Margot to play with him too, but she couldn't see anybody and got frustrated. She wanted to play actual hide and seek, as we did sometimes, but Adam didn't like to be away from the window for very long. At this point, Mom and Dad seemed to be getting a little bit worried. Adam was spending an awful lot of time down there in that basement, and it wasn't right for their child to be in the dark so long. They wanted him to go outside and play with us. Eventually, they took to shooing him out of the basement, and he kicked up a bit of fuss, but eventually he'd come outside and spend some more time with us, and gradually, he seemed to be getting a little less attached to the window. Things went on that way, until one night in late July. Everyone was asleep, Mom and Dad in their room across the hall, Margot and I in our bedroom we shared, and Adam in the room next to ours. Margot had gotten up in the middle of the night to get a glass of water from the kitchen. While she was drinking her water, she saw a man standing by the basement door. As she would later tell us, He was tall and lanky, with thin, scraggly black hair. He was soaking wet, dripping water on the floor. He had bloated eyes that looked as though they were about to rip right out of their sockets. And they were pure white, as if they had some sort of film over them. His jaw was slack, and he was showing a mouth full of rotting teeth. His skin was a sort of bluish gray and sagged around his frame. She screamed bloody murder until all of us were downstairs. At the time, all she could tell us was that she had seen a man by the basement door, and lo and behold, the basement door was open. Mom took all of us upstairs to our bedrooms, and Dad called the police. They searched the house while Mom tried in vain to calm Margot down, but she just kept sobbing. I remember Adam being unusually quiet, his face completely drained of color. I just thought he was upset by Margot screaming. Well, the police didn't find anything. No sign of forced entry. No evidence that anyone had been there. They sat down and spoke to Margot, tried to get a description of the man from her, and she wasn't able to get it all out at one time. But she gave them enough details for them to determine that she must have been sleepwalking and had a nightmare. Margot insisted that she hadn't, and that she was so distraught that she wouldn't sleep in our room anymore. She insisted on sleeping in the master bedroom with our parents. Mom and Dad, meanwhile, were just happy that there wasn't actually an intruder in the house. And after letting us stay up for a while to have some hot chocolate and watch some silly cartoons, they put us back to bed. I didn't sleep well that night, and in the early hours of the morning, Adam came into my room, and I could tell from his tired eyes that he hadn't slept either. "I need to talk to you," he whispered. I sat up and patted my bed, and he came over and sat down. "I know that man," he said. "The man Margot saw? I could feel my eyes bugging out of my head. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because he's from the window," he said. "Like the girl. There's a whole group of them. See, living there. The man and the woman and the girl and the baby and the boy and, well, there's a lot of them, is all." "You're telling me that they come out of the window?" I asked. I didn't think they could," he said, looking disturbed. "The girl told me that they were stuck in there. I think they're coming out to look for me because I stopped playing with them." I found myself shuddering as I tried to dismiss his claims. "This isn't a game, Adam. Margot was really scared. I'm not playing around," he said, his voice getting louder. "I mean it. They're real. I can see them." He was practically shouting them, and I shushed him. "Fine," I said. "Then let's just ask Mom and Dad to board the window back up. They won't be able to get out then, right?" He looked at me slightly mollified. "Right," he said. "Good. Then let's all of us promise not to go down in the basement anymore. Agreed?" "Agreed." "Can I sleep in here for the rest of the night?" It was hardly night anymore, but I agreed. "Take Margot's bed," I said. He sighed in relief and clambered into her bed. He was fast asleep in minutes, but I stayed watching over him until the sun finished climbing into the sky. The next day, all three of us demanded that Mom and Dad board up the window. I told Adam not to tell Mom and Dad about the people in the window, because I knew they wouldn't believe us. Grown-ups never believe children about these kinds of things, and instead, we just told them that the window scared us, and we didn't like it. We wanted it boarded back up. They were a little baffled, but we convinced Margot to tell them that she was afraid of the window, which led them to decide that perhaps it was the reason behind her nightmare. So they boarded it up right away. They showed it off to us when they were done, and I'm sure they didn't imagine Adam's sigh of relief. We thought that would be the end of it. For a few days it was. Margot didn't have any more nightmares, and Adam started to feel better, seemed a little bit more relaxed. He avoided the basement like the plague, but then again, we all did. It was late one night, in mid-August, that it happened. I woke up with a jolt, unsure at first what had woken me up, until I saw Margot and Adam standing next to my bed. Margot was in tears. Adam wasn't far behind. "There's someone in the basement," Adam said. "What are you talking about?" How do you know? Did you go down there? I asked. He shook his head. I went to use the bathroom, and I could hear someone down there. Please, you have to come look, Adam said. The joys of being a big brother, right? I should have woken up our parents, but I was only 10 years old. I was worried if I woke them up for nothing that they would be mad at us, so instead I grabbed my little Pooh Bear flashlight and led the way down the stairs to the basement door. Adam was right. There was a sound, like a loud scratching noise that was somehow carrying up the basement stairs and through the door. Do you think it's them? Adam said. I felt Margot's hand twist mine as she hid behind my back. No, it can't be. Mom and Dad boarded up the window. Maybe it's an animal that got inside. Like a raccoon, maybe. I'm scared, Margot whispered. You two wait up here. I'm gonna go down and have a look, I said. No, Margot shrieked, as Adam and I both frantically shushed her. I don't want you to go alone. I don't want to wait here. Please don't leave us here. I remember feeling exacerbated, on the edge when I asked her, wouldn't you feel better up here? She shook her head and pressed herself even closer to me. I sighed. Fine, let's go downstairs. Everything will be okay, I promise. I'll protect you. That's how I found myself flickering on the basement light and creeping slowly down the stairs with my little siblings in tow. Nothing looked amiss at first, but the scratching was definitely louder, and it only took a moment to discover that it was definitely coming from the window. I crept closer to take a look. The boards in front of the window were shaking, just a little trembling, like something was pushing against them from the other side. The next part happened very fast. First, a particularly loud scratch and violent shake of the board finally made it clear that something was on the other side, and that something was trying to scratch through the wooden boards. Second, as I saw the wood dust falling from the barrier, I realized that whatever it was about to break through. And third, I called out to Adam and Margot, go upstairs and get Mom and Dad, now. I'd just barely gotten the last word out when one of the boards splintered and fell away from the window. I only had a moment to register the pale bluish-gray hand and bloodied fingertips reaching out of the glass. Only the glass seemed to have become liquid, like the surface of a calm lake. I didn't feel calm when the hand wrapped around my right wrist and yanked me towards the window. I screamed as my entire right arm was plunged through the glass. I barely registered that Margot and Adam were shrieking for our parents as my arm was seized by an icy stabbing pain. It felt like icicles were forming on my bones, tearing apart my flesh from the inside. The cold traveled up my arm and through my chest, shocking me into losing my breath and voice. The thing gripped me and yanked, but I was still on the other side of the board, still covering the window. I could feel the wood creaking and groaning as the thing pulled harder and harder. I felt, rather than heard, a strange popping noise, and suddenly, the agony in my arm became 10 times worse. I got my voice back and screamed as hard as I could. I didn't stop when I felt my dad grab my waist and pull me back from the window. I didn't stop when he finally managed to get that thing to let me go, and we both fell back onto the hard cement floor. I didn't stop screaming the entire time they drove me to the hospital. I didn't stop until they sedated me. I was a mess. My wrist was broken and encircled with deep bruises. My arm had been pulled out of my socket, and there were lacerations up and down my arm, some of them deep enough, needing stitches. The police were called, obviously. My parents were distraught. I don't even remember what they told them. Did they actually tell them about the window? Or did they just tell them that there was an intruder that tried to kidnap me? Whatever it was, we moved out of that house soon after that, but not before my dad put iron bars over that window. It's been over a decade since then, and to this day, My parents have never discussed what happened with us. Adam remembers, but he doesn't talk about it. There was only once, when I was back in college on my first winter break, that he brought it up. We were sitting in the living room and chatting late into the night, and he got quiet before he finally asked me, "Do you remember the window?" I swallowed hard and looked into my hot chocolate, unwilling to meet his eyes. "Yeah," I said. There were a few long minutes of silence before he said, "Thank you for saving me, for protecting us like you promised." We left it at that. I don't think Margot really remembers. She was so young that she's never mentioned it before, but she does have a nightmare sometimes, though, about a creepy man standing by a door, about screaming. None of us have ever told her what these nightmares could be coming from, but as for me, I'm doing okay. My arm healed almost completely. There's just a few scars from the cuts left behind. I had nightmares for years, of course. Sometimes I still get them. But I'm, mostly okay. There's just one thing. Since that night, I've been able to sense things that I couldn't sense before. Sometimes I'll feel that cold, sharp stabbing pain in my arm. I look around. I'll see someone who isn't there, at least not physically, anymore, with sagging, bluish-gray skin, bloating eyes, and rotting teeth. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I won't see nothingness. I'll see this forlorn space, full of wailing and shrieking figures, stumbling in the dark and begging for help, for someone to hear them. I'm terrified of the day that they realize that there's someone living who can see into the realm of the dead. I do not know where else to go. At this point, I feel like even speaking about it will make it worse. I should have never allowed myself to get involved in something I knew was wrong. We aren't supposed to speak of it. I'm hoping that not speaking aloud to what I have witnessed will nullify the curse. I am assuming it's a curse. The Wendigo has appeared in a small rural community. We are so far from humanity that we could actually be considered our own little country. We have our own tiny clinic. We grow our own food. We have our own little church, our own little world. What I saw, though, threatens to rip this little world asunder. Lord, help us all. I know how it happened. I was there for the whole thing. This may be terribly disturbing to some people, so please, take care. Come on, Zachariah. I don't think this is a good idea. You know it's blasphemy to talk against God. I tell him. A quiet plea dropped within. He smirks at me and shrugs. I just want to go hear what you have to say. I scoff at him. There are outsiders, Zach. This isn't funny, and Mother will be terribly mad. He shrugs again at me and walks towards the edge of the trees. He turns halfway to look over his shoulder at me. His dark hair sways in the wind, large black eyes twinkling with mischief. "Aren't you going to come with me, Charlie?" he asks. A niggling feeling in my gut tells me that no good could come of hearing a blasphemer. That in the very least, we could upset God and suffer personal repercussions. Still, if my brother is going, I should follow, if only so he has someone to share in his misery. That is what family does. I sigh deeply and nod, following close behind him. We traverse through the trees. Somewhere beyond the thick undergrowth and winding trails lies a clearing. It is here that I am astonished to see much of our town. Led here by curiosity, fear, disdain. Here are many of my friends, their parents, and even a few town elders. No good can come of this, I mused to myself, a shiver chasing its way up my spine. The man before us and his 3 women begin to, for the lack of a better word, preach about their beliefs. I didn't want to listen, but I could hear the murmurings of disbelief and some of revelation. Instead of listening to the babbling any longer, I turned and walked back towards the trees. Stepping into them, I can feel a chill settling into my bones, a sick and very unfriendly feeling sitting deep in my stomach. I speed up, Something is very, very wrong. The moment I burst from the tree line back into town, I freeze. I quickly step back into the tree cover. A creature towers over a mutilated body of one of the remaining townsfolk. Its skull-like face coated in thick blood, steaming from the warmth. Its hollow eyes shine red in the dark, sharp teeth tearing into human flesh and bone, sickening crunches and clicks as its jaw opens and closes. Its furred body is marred with slit crimson and long gangly limbs bent at odd angles. I try to keep my breathing shallow and quickly crouch down. I have to minimize myself to avoid suffering the same fate. The smell alone is enough for me to struggle against my gag reflex. Blood, decay, and death riding on the mostly still air, lingering as if it was a living entity all on its own. The creature stands and makes a low sound, almost too deep to be heard. It hurts my ears, causing them to throb. I watch as it slowly lumbers towards the trees on the opposite side of the clearing, each step jolting and stilted, as if its limbs were improperly attached to its hips. As it vanishes, I slowly stand and wait, holding my breath in fear. It's quite some time before I hear a noise behind me, and still I cannot move, cannot look away. Such carnage lay before me. Something evil was eating those people, and I saw it. The shock had settled into my system, and I could not shake it off. A hand on my shoulder jolts me awake. "Who are you?" A familiar voice trails off. Screams fill the air, and people rush into our town, searching for the people they left behind. I move almost mechanically as I run to my house, the shock removing my typical feelings of panic and fear. I simply needed to know, would they still be alive? Littering the front yard are the mangled corpses of my siblings, my mother. Something in me clicks, and I scream, pure anguish echoing through the wooded area. I scream and scream, while my brother sits on the ground crying. Shaking, I leave my brother and begin to gently pick up the remains of my youngest sister. I carry her pieces into the house, bundling her in a towel, and continue to do the same for my other two siblings. Then, my very own mother. I cry as I cover their bodies and fetch a shovel. At this point, my brother has joined me. He gently totes their bodies to the far back corner of the yard, where I am digging crude graves. It takes a little while, the shovel in my hands thudding against the mildly frozen ground, each splinter an aching muscle, a faint thing in the back of my head. Slowly, we place them in their spots, covering them in the clay, thick dirt. My heart pangs with each shovelful, tears running unbidden down my face. The moment we are finished, I slump down to my knees, my hands clasped. I pray with all my heart, my words running together as I go, stuttering and sputtering out our traditional prayers. I continue praying until the stars come out and my body shakes from lack of food and rest. My brother had long since returned to the house. I jump when a warm hand lays on my back. "Hey, you need to eat. You're freezing. Mom definitely wouldn't be happy if you stayed like this," Zach gently tells me. I slowly and stiffly stand up, every joint and muscle screaming with sudden movement. My legs are quite asleep, and I have to wait for a moment before I can walk properly. As I stand with my brother, I look into the trees just beyond the border of our yard. There, watching me, is the beast I had watched devour one of my neighbors. I glare at it, and in that moment, fear was the last thing in my heart and mind. No, for the first time, I was full of hate. I wanted to destroy something. A ferocious monster lurked within my very bones as I made eye contact with that thing, that hideous creature. The moment my brother looks over, it simply vanishes from sight. He takes my hand and leads me inside. "You need to wash up before you sit down and eat, okay?" I nod silently and walk to my room, grabbing a set of quick clothes and stepping into the bathroom. My mind simply carries me through the functions of showering and dressing. There is no conversation over our dinner, no loving stories before bed. There is no peace for our minds as we lay down to sleep. Paranoia gradually eating away at us. When will they come back? How do we protect ourselves? How do we save the town? Is God angry? Is this his wrath? The moment the sun rises, I am up and down to the road. I need our weapons. These fuckers are going to die. I also decide that there has to be something that knows how to kill these things. I decide to ask around. Many people are beyond communicating, going through rites for their deceased loved ones or dying from grief. I ask after our elders and find them in the center house. "How do I kill them?" I ask abruptly, shoving open the doors. The two elderly men look at me with varying degrees of surprise and annoyance. "You don't," one replies. "A man could not easily take the Wendigo on. I didn't ask for your permission. I asked how. While all of you sit and mourn the dead, someone needs to hunt these things down before we all end up as monster fodder." After a brief discussion, I find myself with a rope, a knife, and gun in hand. Days pass. Weeks. No sign of them, not beyond the low murmuring in the trees. Our food is running really low. If we cannot manage to get food soon, we'll starve with winter fast approaching. Walking out to feed our meager group of chickens, I stare at the demolished hen house with mild horror and a deep sense of dread. Deep claw marks lay within the wood. Large cloven hoof footprints mar the bloody ground. No, they are going to starve us. We can't wait around anymore. We can't. I pack some meager provisions and supplies. Char, you can't hunt them down. They aren't deer. Think about this, Zach yells at me as I stand in the doorway, twilight behind me. We can't keep hiding and hoping they went away. We know they haven't. They are killing our crops, our livestock. Men have gone missing, children and women, dead. He shudders and nods a bit. Fine. Then I'm coming with you. We head out after he packs, and we start into the woods. A mile or so down into the trees, that's when that awful sound begins again. I tense and ready myself. Wait, it's coming from... I slowly turn to where my brother would have been, my eyes widening as I watch his skin rip and tear, shredding and splattering hot, rancid blood all over myself and the ground. Char, it croons at me. I step back, stumbling a bit on a branch. "Charlie, don't go," my brother's voice calls from the hollow skull. "No, Zach," I scream at the creature. It's laughing.
"Stupid child, all alone.
Something clicks, and I raise my gun, hand unwavering, as I empty the 6 shots into the empty husk. It squeals and jerks with each bullet. While it's off balance, I fling the rope out and pull with all my force, pulling it from its feet. It slams into the ground, and it swings its arm out. It knocks into my shins and sweeps my feet from beneath me. I scream and jolt back to my feet. It thrashes against the handmade rope, the steel wire burning its flesh. I jump upon it and slam my blade into its chest, prying open its ribs with all of my force. I quickly reach in, my hand clasping the frozen and collapsed heart. Yanking it, I fall back. It lets go with a dull plunk. I hiss as it burns my hand, but run for my bag as the creature squeals and screams. I I grab my homemade blowtorch and set burning it to a crisp. The darker it gets, the less the monster struggles. Soon it is gone, just like my brother. I can't hear the others as they come towards me. And now, I write. I tell you what has happened this far as they fast approach my spot. Lord, help our little town. Please give us the strength to kill these things. Set us free.
Growing up, I had always been fascinated with the woods. From hiking to fishing to exploring. It's always been a place where I felt like myself. Typically, from hiking from my initial entry point, my grandparents' backyard. I could never quite make it to the old bridge that connected my area to the other side, where the forest continued. The bridge was old, and I'm not sure when it was built, but it was there nevertheless. That was until one day, when I set off, extra early, and made it my mission to go to the other side, with nothing more than a backpack, some water, and a flashlight. I set off on my new adventure while hiking through the woods. I found my usual spots, the fallen down tree, my moss-covered rock landmark, and the small stream where I often fished. And after about 5 hours of hiking, I finally made it to the old bridge by this point. The sun was starting to set in the sky. I figure I made it this far, I may as well try to cross it and see what was finally over there. Parts of the bridge were broken down, and you could fall right to the river through one of the holes. So with caution, I crawled on my hands and knees on the stone brim of what was left of the bridge. Within a good 10 or 15 minutes or so, I finally managed to make it across. As I descended back down into the forest, I noticed that there was a small break in the tree line up ahead, so I decided to continue my adventure. When I got up to the break, I noticed that the forest opened up into a small pasture. Towards the tail of the end of the pasture, before the forest began again, there was a medium-sized silo, and at first glance, it looked pretty old, probably 80 to 100 years old if I were to guess. So being the curious kid I was, I decided to get a closer look. The bricks that comprised the silo were old and starting to weather, covered in moss, vines, and dust. Around the side, there was a small opening, so I decided to go inside. While inside, I noticed that there was strange markings on the walls. The markings were a dark brown color. It looked to be some kind of language that I couldn't identify. Then, towards the center, there was some kind of altar. This altar was comprised of sticks and what looked like animal bones. It was also covered in a dried brown substance. Already creeped out, and taking a quick look overhead, I could see it was starting to get dark. So not needing another reason to leave, I decided to exit the silo and head home. But upon exiting the structure, I saw a group of people, about 20 or so, approaching the area. They all seemed to be wearing some kind of dark red robes, druid-like in appearance. This scared the hell out of me. Whatever they were gearing up to do, I wanted absolutely no part of, especially not after I saw what was in that silo. So thinking quick, I darted towards the beginning of the woods where I had come from. Then I stayed at a dead run for what seemed like hours, but I'm sure it was only minutes, until I saw the bridge that connected my side to this one. After scaling the bridge once again and running back to my grandparents' house, I decided from that day forward never again to go to the other side. But what was soon discovered would shock everyone. You see, there had been 6 cases of children going missing that year, and after an extensive search of several of those missing persons, it was found out that the children had been abducted and murdered. The people I had seen, they were part of some kind of a satanic cult, and they were kidnapping and murdering kids. That brown substance on the walls and the altar, well, that was more than likely human blood. But thankfully, the main culprits had been caught and prosecuted. But I will never forget that dreadful day, the day I decided to go over that bridge and venture to the other side of the woods.
About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in this city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance-walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open, wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and I stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward. Fucking smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about a half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved. Until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I just stood there for some time, staring at him. And then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say that at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there completely frozen as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was. What the fuck do you want? In an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the fuck? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, started dance walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way. And this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile. But he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that is a very, very scary thing to see.
This story might be paranormal, or it could be explained as hallucinations that happen when you're between sleeping and waking up. Apparently that's a thing. I'll let you decide what you think it is. A few years ago I moved into my fiance's house, which was built in the early 1900s. And shortly after moving in, I started seeing things when I woke up in the middle of the night. The least terrifying one that happened a lot was seeing our cat, who wasn't in our bedroom, sitting on the floor, looking at me. She would then slowly float straight up and ascend through the ceiling. Sometimes I saw a boy and a little girl standing by my fiance's side. I remember the little boy was wearing a plaid shirt, and the little girl was wearing a white dress. As strange as it is to say, they didn't feel creepy. A couple times they were standing by my side, and after a few minutes, they would slowly disappear. But sometimes, it was a man in a black hoodie standing by my fiance's side of the bed, and he felt very dark and creepy. Once, he even had bright glowing red eyes, and it took me a while to fall back asleep after he disappeared. The most terrifying one that happened was that I woke up to see a little girl standing up on the bed. She looked a lot like me. I was pregnant at the time, and I remember thinking that she could be my daughter. It was really nice until she started morphing into a very creepy and sinister old woman standing over me. She smiled, and in a really terrifying way before falling through me. Her body was still straight when she fell. She just kind of tilted towards me and came at me very, very fast. Her face was level with mine before she fell through me and down through the bed. My heart jumped through my chest, and it felt like the wind was knocked out of me. I had to wake up my fiancé because I was so scared and couldn't go back to sleep. I saw other things in that house, but those are the main ones that stuck with me. The hallucinations have stopped since my fiancé and I moved out. I also found out that his ex was into some dark occult things while in that house before I met him. Make of that what you will, but one last thing I'd like to add is something I thought everyone experienced until my fiance told me otherwise. Quite regularly as a kid, my sister and I would hear our names being whispered repeatedly behind us. It would get louder and louder, said faster and faster, until it was right by our ear and kind of whooshed by as it ended. And it happened so regularly that I just thought it was a trick of the mind. I opened my eyes trying to wake up. I was greeted by a pitch black filter covering my entire vision. Disoriented, I reached to my bedside table to grab my phone and to shine some light on the situation. The power must have gone out in the night, I thought. When my hand reached the spot where the table would normally be, it hit nothing but cold, dry air. I was beginning to wake up and process what the hell was going on when I heard soft footsteps coming from my direction. I looked around to see if I could find anything that was coming towards me, but the darkness was too thick. Out of instinct, I tried to move to the corner of my bed closest to the wall to protect myself, but when I tried to move, my limbs felt like they had the weight of a car on them. I yelled and squirmed desperately to free myself from the invisible restraints, but it was all to no avail. I began to feel a cold, not just any cold, a cold that harbors the fears and despairs of 1,000 people staring death in the face. That's when I began to feel something terrifying. It felt like it was right next to me, but still, all I could see was darkness. I was sweating profusely, probably making a puddle around my body. I could feel my heart drumming wildly, like that of prey being chased by a predator. Then, out of nowhere, a light popped on. It was hovering about a foot above my midsection. I dreaded what I was going to see standing beside me. Gathering all my courage, I forced myself to look. I immediately regretted every life choice that had brought me to this moment in time. The thing, this creature, was much taller than an average human, and it looked human, but it was no shorter than 8 feet tall. It was freakishly thin and bony. Its ribs were prominently showing underneath its skin. It had a long neck that was bent, looking over me. Its head was an odd oval shape, and it had no facial features that any creature should have. No mouth, no nose, no ears. All it had was a massive amber-colored eye in the center of its face, and some small, scraggly hairs atop its dry and cracked scalp. Its head was hanging about 3 feet above mine. Its hands were resting on the side of my bed. Long, gnarled fingers with knots for knuckles, and I saw 3 fingers on each hand. The 2 disgusting hands were connected to 2 freakishly long arms, and I couldn't see all of them because they were stretched out to reach the strange light source hovering above me. It began to shift. It moved its left arm up from the side of my bed to about a foot above where the light was. It then proceeded to slowly wrap its fingers around the light. Its fingers popped and crunched, and then it squeezed. The light went out with a zap, and then there was nothing but darkness again. As terrified as I was also slightly relieved that I didn't have to look at whatever this thing was anymore. Then, the one thing that I had been fearing the most happened. It touched me. One of its long, bony fingers slid down the side of my face. It felt like someone had dropped a lizard on me. An incredibly cold and slimy lizard. It was a new kind of cold. It felt like all the life and warmth had left my body and soul in an instant. And then, it was all gone. All the darkness and the thing was finally over. I had woke up screaming from this nightmare. It all felt so real. far too real for comfort. I quickly touched my face, and it was still cold to the touch. My arms and legs felt so tired and sore. They ached with a dull pain. Was it real, I asked myself. Had I had my first ever sleep paralysis, something I'd only ever read about? I decided to go and wake my brother up. He was always someone I could confide in. I quietly walked down the hallway to his room as to not disturb my parents. I gently turned the knob on his door and began to go into his room. I froze. Before my very eyes was the creature. It was squeezing my brother's severed head, dripping his blood down onto its eye. I couldn't even scream. I ran as fast as I could and locked myself in my room. I quickly found my phone and frantically dialed 911. Within seconds, a grovelly voice answered and said,
It's there, isn't
This was followed by a horrific and inhuman scream. I dropped my phone instantly. This whole situation just wasn't right. I placed my ear to my door, and I didn't hear anything. So thinking this was to be my one chance to escape, I quietly opened my door, just enough to squeeze out, to begin to survey the hallway. There was nothing. I ran downstairs and was heading past the kitchen towards the front door. It was here that I saw this monster. Its disgusting hand was holding what was left of my mother. I froze yet again, debating whether or not to try and escape or to stay and fight. And it was in this moment that I realized that the creature's skin was not frail, but more scale-like. Its three-pronged hands were fitted with talons that looked like they could cut steel. Knowing what this thing did to my brother and mother, I couldn't go out the front door. I kept my eyes on it as I ran to the knife block, drawing out a chef's knife. It dropped my mother's remains and began to scamper towards me, its amber eye now turning a crimson and glowing red. I began to swing wildly at it, as hard and fast as I could, until I suddenly felt a horrific burning sensation in my left arm. Except my arm was on the floor, and I began to clutch my bloody stump. I must have passed out because I woke up in a hospital bed after being out for God knows how long. I was shortly after greeted by the police. They said that they had received the call, but that there was nothing but static, and then the call dropped. So they dispatched a squad car as soon as they could. Upon arrival, they found my brother dead on the stairs from 3 long stab wounds. And when I asked what happened to my mother, they said she was nowhere to be found. Had I killed my brother? Did I cut my own arm off? I couldn't have. After they tested me to see if there was anything in my system, they lowered their suspicion, and they came to the conclusion that I couldn't have carried out such deed, especially on myself. I told them of the creature and what had transpired, but they didn't believe me. They must have thought that I was in a delusional, post-traumatic state or something, which I was, but that's beside the point. I was released 2 weeks later to the care of my aunt and uncle, just a few towns over. As of now, my mother is still missing, and my brother's murder, in the eyes of the law, is still unsolved. But I know what happened, and every night that I close my eyes, I see that glossy oval in my nightmares, watching and waiting until the time is right to strike. I often took the same road headed to and from work, and things were usually pretty ordinary, and that was until one night in late November of 2013. This road led from the town I lived in to the town I worked in, just about 30 miles away or so. It wasn't too far from the Air Force Base, and it had large cornfields still undeveloped on either side once I got to the outskirts of the town that I lived in. One night, as I was headed back from work, taking my usual route, I passed the downtown area when it started to rain, and what started as a drizzle quickly turned to a torrential downpour. Having flooded an engine on a previous vehicle by accident, driving in the rain always made me nervous. So, stepping on the gas, I quickly made my way past the base and onto the long stretch home. It was pretty dark by this time, probably around 11 to 12 at night, and any and all street lamps, as scarce as they were fairly blacked out by the rain itself, so it made things slightly more unnerving for me. As I continued on, I saw something out of the corner of my eye through my passenger side window. Thinking that it was maybe just my mind playing tricks on me, I paid it no attention and continued to drive. But just a few more miles, I thought I saw something again. By this time, I was having to drive at about half the speed as the speed limit due to how bad the weather was. And I wasn't expecting to see what I saw. On the side of the road, there was a woman walking. She seemed to have on white pants and a white shirt, covered in blood. Obviously freaked out and concerned, I slowed my car down to try and get her attention to maybe help her, or at the very least get a better description. But just as I approached her from the road, she darted into the cornfield. Bewildered and shocked, I immediately sped home as best I could and dialed 911. I told them what I saw, described the girl as best I could, and asked them to conduct a welfare check if possible. Thinking that was the end of it, I decided to clean up and get ready for bed. I laid my head down on my pillow and quickly fell asleep. Roughly 3 hours after I had phoned the authorities, I got another call from them around 3:30 a.m. in the morning. They told me that they went and combed the fields, but they didn't find anything. They then proceeded to question me for about 15 minutes in detail. I, of course, recounted everything that I had seen, and I was sure what the woman looked like, having been just a few feet away from her in my vehicle. They told me they would keep an eye out and let me go again. A few weeks passed, and I had long since shaken off the weird night and continued to take my usual route to and from work on the same road, and nothing happened, just like before. But one day, when I was on my lunch break, I received a call from a local number I didn't recognize, but I went ahead and answered it anyway. It was a homicide detective with my local law enforcement. He proceeded to tell me that a woman who fit the description I gave was found murdered in the neighborhood development just a few miles behind the cornfield, just about 6 days before I called. He then, of course, questioned me again. I obviously had no idea who the woman was or what she was doing there that strange rainy night. And I never did find out if it was someone else. But the fact that I maybe saw a ghost or someone who was injured that never got help still haunts me to this day. You just never know what kind of unexplained things can happen out of the blue. If you made it to the end, I'd just like to say thank you so much for watching and or listening. This is an idea I've had for a good while. I've always been a massive fan of thunderstorms, and having added rain sounds to previous videos, I wanted to make something longer in length for you guys to enjoy. I did also want to shout out everyone who made this video possible, and all links will be down in the description. First of all, I'd like to thank Being Scared for his massive inspiration to my channel. His storytelling and artwork and overall style is just awesome. And if you guys haven't checked him out yet, you should definitely go do that. Secondly, I'd like to thank my good friend Say Evil for his narration of the story The Silo today. He's not only been a great friend, but he makes fantastic content as well, so definitely check him out too. I'd also like to thank my friend over at Preacher's Den for his great narration of The Smiling Man. Check him out as well, he's got some great work. Next, I'd like to thank our authors. For the story Our House Had a Window That Led to Nowhere, The author was Rona Vassilar. I really genuinely enjoyed both reading and narrating her story on this one. She's an excellent author. You guys should definitely check out her page and blog. For the story Blasphemy Brings Wendigos, the author was Ashlyn Sticks. Just wanted to say that she did a great job. And she also runs a podcast called The Crow's Nest, which is available on Spotify and Pandora. 3 of the stories were written by my fiance and myself. And lastly, I'd like to thank our amazing artist, BC Parrott, for all the time he puts into making our killer art, animations, and music. Thank you guys so much for listening if you took the time, and if you like this new style of video I'm trying out, hit the like button to let me know, subscribe with the bell, and comment below. It helps me so much when you do these things. I also just launched a brand new website, which is mysteryarchives.com, and if you'd like to support the channel, check out mysteryarchives.com/donate. And until next time, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Thank you so much for watching, and have yourself a wonderful day.